Ahead on Costas tonight. After one of the biggest and most disturbing scandals in sports history, Penn State commissioned an independent investigation to detail what went wrong and why.
The report came out saying some powerful campus leaders showed a total and consistent disregard for abuse victims.
The report that emerged delivered a scathing indictment of the university and Coach Joe Paterno. But later came under criticism itself for conclusions that some felt were too far-reaching. Tonight, another look at the Freeh report and what it means for Penn State and the legacy of Joe Paterno. Next on Costas Tonight.
From our NBC Sports Network studio, this is Costas Tonight, brought to you by Chevrolet. Here's Bob Costas.
And so here we go with an hour on an issue that to many may by now be in the rearview mirror, but to others is still very much unresolved. The Jerry Sandusky child sex abuse scandal nearly took down the entire football program at Penn State. Legendary coach Joe Paterno was fired, the president of the university was forced to resign, and the penalties levied on the program, $60 million in fines, 4 years of bowl ineligibility, 14 seasons of vacated wins, scholarship reductions, and more, were the most extensive in NCAA history. Those penalties were based largely on a report that was supposed to serve as the final word on the scandal. But does it? The Penn State Board commissioned former FBI Director Louis Freeh to conduct an independent investigation. His findings were released in July of 2012, and most significantly concluded that Joe Paterno, Athletic Director Tim Curley, University Vice President Gary Schultz, and President Graham Spanier were complicit in concealing Sandusky's activities. The report went on to say that those university figures exhibited a striking lack of empathy for Sandusky's victims and placed the image of Paterno and the Penn State football program above any concerns about Sandusky's crimes or his victims. But 3 months after the Freeh report, a group of Penn State alumni and supporters issued a response highly critical of Freeh. And then this past February, the family of Joe Paterno commissioned another review in which Dick Thornburg, the former U.S. Attorney General and governor of Pennsylvania, characterized Freeh's report as seriously flawed. With Spanier, Schultz, and Curley awaiting trial later this year, new information and greater clarity may be forthcoming. But in any case, there's one man who was never charged and can no longer defend himself. But Joe Paterno still has many defenders and supporters, including our three guests tonight. Because of the Jerry Sandusky interview on Rock Center, we have a connection to this story. So when word got out that we'd be doing this program, some might have thought that we'd be taking an advocacy position. We are not. What we are acknowledging is that there are credible people, not those at the fringes, as there are with every issue, but sober and credible people who have issues with the Freeh report. At the very least, they deserve to be heard. And so that's our purpose tonight, to the extent that time allows. This issue is so complicated that there'll be months of testimony and legal proceedings still pending, and likely years of ongoing discussion in the court of public opinion. We can't hope to get into each and every particular, each and every assertion, each and every counter-assertion. So we advise you that the Freeh report itself is available at the Freeh report on psu.com, and the Thornburg report is available at paterno.com for those who want to delve deeper into this and draw their own conclusions. Our purpose here is to lay out, at least in broad strokes, what those who differ with the Freeh report, particularly as it regards Paterno, have to say. And so we welcome Dan McGinn, the Paterno family spokesman, Dick Thornburg, the aforementioned former Attorney General of the United States and Governor of Pennsylvania, and Wick Sollers, the Paterno family attorney. We should also mention that we invited both Louis Freeh and also NCAA President Mark Emmert to be part of this program, and they declined. They have a standing offer to appear should they decide to do so in the future. Governor Thornburg, let's start with you. You have a past association with Louis Freeh. You have expressed general respect for him, but at the same time, you have said that his report is among the most seriously flawed that you have ever reviewed. Why?
I do have a lot of respect for Louis Freeh. We worked together when I was Attorney General, and he was a prosecutor in the Department of Justice. I'm puzzled by the shortcomings that are exhibited in this particular report. They are serious. They are not trifling. The report itself is deeply flawed, as you noted, and it's in many respects incomplete, inaccurate. And to us in our review, we found it relied much more on speculation and conjecture than on facts that were developed through the investigation. Let me illustrate that by looking at the most serious charge. That charge, and I'm quoting, is that Joe Paterno and others, in order to avoid the consequences of bad publicity, repeatedly concealed facts relating to Sandusky's child abuse. This is purely and simply false. There's nothing in the record that they developed in their investigation to support this. It's based, as I said, on speculation and conjecture. In particular, in dealing with the two principal incidents that are focused on in the history of this sad and sorry affair, you look at 1998, the allegation made with respect to Jerry Sandusky with a young boy in a shower room. While it's not clear what, if any, knowledge Joe Paterno had of this matter, what is clear is that it was investigated by the appropriate legal authorities, no prosecution resulted, and that was where it stood. With respect to the 2001 incident...
That's the one that Mike McQuarrie reported.
Exactly. McQuarrie reported to Coach Paterno. He passed... and it was a kind of a cryptic report. It was given in several versions by McQuarrie in his conversation with others. But nonetheless, Coach Paterno reported it as required by the regimen at Penn State to the appropriate spot within the hierarchy where these kinds of reports ought to be made. And no attempt was made by him, no attempt whatsoever to conceal or suppress or otherwise keep this report from this matter from public view.
There are any number of things which we don't have time to get into here in terms of assertions about conflicts of interest or illogical conclusions or speculation as opposed to conclusions based on hard evidence. But in the public mind, and I think it is worth noting that most sports fans know what the Freeh report is, and I guess fewer than 1% of them have actually read the Freeh report. But it comes down, I think, to two things. One, the idea of whether there was a cover-up and what would the motivation be for the cover-up. And two, leaving all the other particulars aside, if Joe Paterno had even a general knowledge of the 1998 investigation of Jerry Sandusky, even though it resulted in no criminal charges, and if even the most benign description possible from McQuarrie was offered about the 2001 incident, wouldn't those two things taken together, the 98 and 2001 incident, wouldn't those two incidents have been enough to have any decent person, let alone a supposed paragon of virtue like Joe Paterno, say, hold on, there's a problem here, there's a pattern here, and I need to step in and do something about it?
Well, first of all, Bob, as Governor Thornburg said and pointed out, the 98 incident was completely investigated. We don't know what, if anything, Joe Paterno may have known about 98. Certainly as of 2011, when he testified before the grand jury, he had no recollection of anything occurring in 98 with regard to Sandusky.
But by then he's an old man, and there are some indications that he would have known, at least in a general way, about the investigation in 98. Fair to say, right?
We can't rule out that possibility. But as Jim Clemente, the FBI profiler, whom we use as an expert in our report, pointed out quite clearly, if Joe Paterno had known about the 98 incident, its full investigation, and the fact that there was a determination that Jerry Sandusky had not abused a child inappropriately. In fact, it was deemed to be a horseplay incident. That may well have played into his view of 2001. And as you know, even Mike McQuarrie would say he did not describe that event in graphic terms. That might well have colored to Paterno.
To the grand jury, he had a different testimony.
Exactly. But to Paterno, Mike McQuarrie has testified he, because of his respect for Joe and his relationship, did not describe that in graphic terms. Joe Paterno's knowledge of 98, the full investigation, and essentially the exoneration, if he did know, could well have colored his view of 2001.
Dan, to the average person, I think the question is this. If you heard that your own son was playing soccer for a coach who was investigated a few years before, although not charged, investigated for inappropriate behavior, and then was found showering after hours with another player on the team, would you allow your son to continue to play on that team? Would you associate yourself with that person? If he lived down the block, would you have him over for a barbecue? Wouldn't your own actions, just as a normal human being, toward that person change drastically, knowing just those two things? Even if you couldn't prove anything criminal in a court of law, wouldn't that change how you felt about that person?
Well, Bob, of course. You know, what you say is very logical. And one of the difficulties today is we're taking layers of knowledge today and reports and theories that have been put out there and applying it back to events some years ago, which are much more clouded, much more difficult to know. Jim Clemente, we mentioned, and for Governor Thornburg's report we go through, what happened with Freeh is a tragedy in this case because it was an assertion of a lot of theories with much less evidence to back it up than what people knew. So the Paterno family understands, and they want this clear. They really understand why the public has concluded what they have. If you know what Freeh said, followed by precipitous NCAA action, it looks as if this story is closed. That's very rational for people to come to. This is one of those cases where what you learn after you think you know it all really reveals this case. Just one factor. Joe Paterno's wife, Sue, said, we had our children with him. They were at pools, at events with him. They had no concern because they had no awareness. You're talking about an incredibly sophisticated criminal. One other point I would make to you. Joe Paterno's life has been discarded here as if it isn't revealing. It's a misunderstanding to think that you would somehow say, well, Joe Paterno lived a good life, therefore it somehow makes up if there were mistakes here. It's the contrary. The facts aren't clear. In the most objective way you'd look at this. So you would look at the pattern of a life lived in a very high-profile way under a lot of pressure. What was the pattern? What did you see with his life? And his life was about protecting children, serving children's best interests.
Without trying to answer for you, is it not human nature for people to assume that what they now know is what the principals knew all along?
It's such an important point, Bob. It's such an important point because we look back. Look, you had the Catholic Church scandals leading up to this. Then you had the Jerry Sandusky trial in June. There is a visceral anger and disgust in the public. We're all just outraged at what happened. Then this report comes out immediately, and it's not an objective report. It's an indictment. And this was the one way for all of us to express our anger. And it looked as if we had the goods. We knew that Joe Paterno was somehow responsible. So we're applying knowledge that didn't exist at that time. We're ignoring how sophisticated a criminal Sandusky is, and we're relying on what Freeh said as if it's the final word. What we're here to tell you today is we know it's not the final word. We also know it will take a long time to have this story play out in a way that people can fully understand what happened.
We'll continue the conversation in just a moment.